you guys are doing very, very well. Now, you've seen me previously, and if you would have followed the previous videos, you would have known what we're going to be doing today. But for all of the freshers, the newcomers, I hope you guys are having a very good time. And let me very quickly tell you as to why is it that we are all here. I am now going to be starting with the complete analysis of the English section of the actual CAT paper of 2022, the first slot. So here we're going to dive very deep into the passages. We're going to check for every option, why the answer, why not, be catered to, and be confident as to why we think something seems to be an answer, even if we might really be drawn towards another option being the answer. That clarity of thought is very important because it is only when you are sure of why an answer and why not would you know what needs to happen next. Now that we've decided what we are here for and set the agenda right, let us begin with no further ado. Now, beginning with what we're going to do is we're going to start by reading the passage. We're first going to be reading the passage, we'll then move on to the questions, evaluate every option only to be confident of why an answer and why not. So let me just very quickly start with the reading of the passage and see what do we have in store for us. Now, the first passage begins on Stoicism, which was founded in 300 BC by the Greek philosopher Zeno and survived into the Roman era until about AD 300. So it's told us as to what has been, the timeline of Stoicism to have started and until when did it actually survive. Now, according to the Stoics, emotions consist of two movements. So according to the people who were proponents of Stoicism, they said that there are two movements to emotion. The first movement is the immediate feeling and other reactions. Example, the physiological response that occur when a stimulus or event occurs. So the first is when there is a movement of the immediate feeling that happens and the other reaction to it. So it's more of, the moment a stimulus is triggered or an event occurs, it's the kind of response that we have. So they've clubbed it as a physiological response. For instance, consider what could have happened if an army general accused Marcus Aurelius of treason in front of the other officers. The first movement for Marcus may have been internal surprise and anger in response to this insult, accompanied perhaps by some involuntary physiological and expressive responses such as face flushing and a movement of the eyebrow. So they've given us an example only to be able to tell us, say for example, somebody's been blamed. Now, the moment you blame somebody and that person feels offended of it, what is going to happen? It's going to be visible on the face, the physical aspect of it. So his face is going to be flushed out, his eyebrow might twitch and all of those. Now, the second movement is what one does next about the emotion. So the second movement behaviors occur after thinking and are under one's control. But the second movement that comes up are mostly the more thought after ones. So examples of the second movement for Marcus might have included a plot to seek revenge, action signifying deference and appeasement, or perhaps proceeding as he would have proceeded whether or not this event have occurred, continuing to lead the Romans in a way that Marcus Aurelius believed best benefited them. So the author is then given us three versions as to what could have happened next. A, he could have of course staged a revolt. Second, he would have, had a very vindictive plan. Third, he would have just been very cool and calm about it and not really done anything. Continuing the way he would, be leading the Romans just as he did. In the Stoic view, choosing a reasoned, unemotional response as a second movement is the only appropriate response. So the Stoics always felt that it is just the second response which is going to be the appropriate response. So they don't like the first impulse that actually pops out. Now, the Stoics believe that to live the good life and be a good person, we need to free ourselves of nearly all desires, such as too much desire for money, power, or sexual gratification. So the Stoics always said that if you want to live a good life, if you want to live a satisfied life and be a good person, you will nearly have to relinquish all desires that you have. Prior to second movements, we can consider what is important in life. Money, power, or excessive sexual gratification are not important. Character, rationality, and kindness are important. So he goes about by saying that all of these things are pretty material. They're not the ones that define you as a person or your worth of living. It is character, rationality, and kindness that does. The Epicureans, first associated with the Greek philosopher Epicurus, held a similar view. So even the Epicureans thought of the same, believing that people should enjoy simple pleasures such as good conversation, friendship, food, wine, and not be indulgent in these pursuits and not follow passion for those things that hold no real value, like power or money. So even the Epicureans were of the similar line of thought. They also were against the idea of holding on to money and power. As Oatley back in 2004 states, the Epicureans articulated a view: enjoyment of relationship with friends, of other things rather than illusionary, simple rather than artificially inflated, possible rather than vanishingly unlike. That is certainly relevant today, to which there has been a quote that has been used by the Epicureans that they always were the ones who gave more value to relationships, to the intangible, associations that would happen, because they are what are going to stay with you and not really the other things. Much of what is pretty relevant even in today's times. In sum, these ancient Greek and Roman philosophers saw emotion, especially strong ones, as potentially dangerous. So they thought that, the impulse might actually be burning buildings. They viewed emotions as experiences that needed to be reined. Reined is to control and control. So of course, they always thought that all of these emotions need to be settled. One needs to be sobered down and one needs to have control over how the reaction of a person is. As Oatley in 2004 points out, the Stoic idea bears some similarity to Buddhism. Buddha, living in India in the 6th century BC, argued for cultivating a certain attitude that decreases the probability of, in Stoic terms, destructive second movements. So they always went about, Buddha also went about by preaching the idea that there has to be some sort of control to the destructive movements. Through meditation and the right attitude, one allows emotions to happen to oneself. It is impossible to prevent this, but one is advised to observe the emotions without necessarily acting on them. One achieves some distance and decides what has value and what does not have value. So it's via meditation, and to be very peaceful with having the right attitude is how you decide how your reaction needs to be. Not everything has to be knee-jerk, not everything has to be volatile. Additionally, the Stoic idea of developing virtue in oneself, of becoming a good person, which the Stoics believed we could do because we have the touch of the divine, laid the foundation of the three monotheistic religions. In fact, that is exactly what became the bedrock, the very principle for the the religions that we have, which are Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. As with Stoicism, tenets of these religions include controlling our emotion lest we engage in sinful behavior. So all of these, the foundational principle of all of the religion, the basic tenets go back to Stoicism, and that be one must always have control over their emotions unless of course we succumb to giving in to the sinful behavior. So the passage more or less talks about how one's behavior should be. It tends to be talking about how an impulsive reaction is a bad idea. One must always back an action with rationality, and to be more sober, to be more calmer, to be able to enjoy the intangible values are always much better than chasing materialistic pursuits. So that is exactly what the passage is about. A very easy passage at that. Let us get on to the questions to be able to see what do we have as the answer. Now, the one thing that we always do is whenever there is a question that is being asked, always make sure that you're first anticipating the idea in your head. So you need to think of what you think the answer should be, get a skeletal frame of it, and then see which of the following fits in well. So it's like a stencil, you slip it in. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing even now. So on the basis of the passage, which one of the following statements can be regarded to be true? So we'll do a simple true and false and find out what our answer be. There were no Stoics in India at the time. Now, the passage nowhere spoke about the Stoics in India at all. We just spoke about Stoicism. Buddhism had a relevance with India. There was no other combination, so we cannot confirm on this at all. This is out of scope. The Stoics valorized the pursuit of money, power, and sexual. No, they were not the ones. Valor means something which is done with great pride, right? But that's not what it is. In fact, the passage was the opposite of this. So this can't be. The Stoic influences can be seen in multiple religions. Yes, the last line of the passage altogether makes sense. The Epicureans believe in controlling all emotions. No, they went about by saying nearly all is what they always understood. They all obviously spoke about enjoying the simple pleasures. They were not of the, in fact, neither the Stoics nor the Epicureans were ever of, say, they were never of the favor that one has to be controlling all emotions. I mean, good emotions, of course, can be portrayed, but it is the negative emotions that need to be reined. So this again is not going to be an answer. It's explicit again. We don't take explicits as answers, which means the correct answer is going to be option C over here. Let's see what do we have for the next question. Which one of the following statement, if false, could be seen as contradicting the fact or the argument of the passage? So first, let's just boil down to what the question wants from us. Now it says, which one of the following, if false, right? That is, if it is going to be false, is going to be seen as contradicting the idea. So we need to contradict the idea. If we have to contradict the idea, we have to say that impulsive emotion is correct. That's how we are going to contradict the idea. And now we will simply have to see which of the following is now going to be false, right? Which of the following, if false, could be seen as contradicting the idea. So it has to be a false option, and of course it has to be something that's going to contradict the idea. Now let's see. The Greek philosopher Zeno survived into the Roman era until about 300 AD. Now, of course, I mean, if you see option A, it is clearly going to be incorrect as it pertains to the death of Zeno, whereas the passage focuses on the philosophy of Stoicism. This does nothing. A can't be an answer for us. Despite practicing meditation and cultivating the right attitude, emotions cannot ever be controlled. Now, if this, of course, be true, it will contradict the argument put forth, and the passage will be in some way or the other negated or undermined, but we want an answer that needs to be false. So this is not going to be an answer for us. In the Stoic view, choosing a reasoned, unemotional response as the first movement is an appropriate response. Again, this is going to contradict, and this is true, but we want an option that will contradict and be false. So this can't be an answer either. In the Epicurean view, indulging in simple pleasures is not desirable. Now, this is not going to contradict the idea, and this is the one information that is false, which means it is going to clearly strengthen the idea that we have. So, indulging in simple emotions is not desirable, which simply goes to say, and if you go back to the passage, it says the Epicureans are associated with the philosopher Epicurus, who shared a similar perspective. They believed in finding enjoyment in simple pleasures such as good friendship, conversation, food, wine without excessive indulgence. So clearly over here we have the answer to be option D. Let's see what do we have in question number 3. Now, through meditation and the right attitude, one allows emotions to happen to oneself. It is impossible to prevent this, but one is advised to observe the emotions without necessarily acting on them. One achieves some distance and decides what has value and what does not have value. In the context of the passage, which one of the following is not a possible implication of the quoted statement? Which means we have to say which of the following is not a consequence, right? So clearly we understand that via the quote of the line that we have, it simply goes to say that we are able to observe the emotions without necessarily acting. So there's no reaction to the action that happens, and we're able to achieve some distance. We're able to decide on what trait do we want to play around, and does it even have the worth, the value or not. So it's simply telling us to introspect before you act. How worthy is it going to be for you? Now, if I have to see which of the following is not a consequence, I will have to see which of the following is now not going to align with the consequence of this. Now, meditation allows certain out-of-body experience to permit us to gain the distance necessary to control. Now, of course, now this says meditation is going to allow us to, or it is going to permit us to gain the distance. Now, this is clearly not a possible implication of this, because this is not a consequence of this line. This can be an answer. Let's reserve this. Meditation and the right attitude in this instance implies an initially passive reception of all experiences. Yes, while this, of course, is a consequence, it is a valid implication, because it will give you the right approach. Right? So if you just stay passive, that is not actively involved and be triggered by that emotion, you will have enough time to be able to figure out how you wish to react to it. This can't be an answer because this is a consequence. The observation of emotion in a distant manner corresponds to the second movement referred. Well, that is what it is. It was about sobering down and then and then reacting to it, and also seeing if that reaction is worthy enough or not. So this also can't be an answer because this is an implication for this. Emotional response can make it difficult to distinguish valuable experiences from valueless experiences. Yes, and which is why impulse often overtakes, but we have to stay calm, think over, and only then should we react to understand how meaningful is it really going to be. So this is definitely a consequence of it, not my answer, which makes my correct answer to be option A. And the last one for this passage, which one of the following statement would be an accurate inference from the example of Marcus Aurelius? So in the passage, we know that Marcus Aurelius was being used as an example. Simply why? Because there were these two, three, hypothetical situations that were given to be able to tell as to how should his reaction have been. Now, Marcus Aurelius was a Stoic whose philosophy survived into the Roman era. Now we know that A cannot be an answer because there is no such mention of the fact that he was a Stoic. We can't add information nor can we assume things outside the scope. Marcus Aurelius was one of the leaders of the Roman army. Yes, very much, because it says, or he could just continue to roam, which means that was simply a hypothetication. Makes sense, can be an answer. Marcus Aurelius was humiliated by the accusation of treason in front of the other officers. Now, again, C cannot be an answer. It might seem like, it has a slight bit mention of it, but if you just read the paragraph that we have, we understand that it is again something that not everybody is going to align with. While it could be that he was specifically humiliated by the accusation of the treason, but it could be other humiliations, or it could just be that he being calm. So we definitely know that this can't be. Marcus Aurelius plotted revenge in his quest for justice. Again, this is not going to be because both of these were in terms of or. So the one thing that we know which is absolutely true and it's an accurate inference as to why the mention of this guy was being done becomes option B. Well, I hope you understand the first passage absolutely clearly, and I think with that, let's get on to the next passage, everybody, starting from passage 5 to 8. Right then, let's get on to the next passage. Now, again, first things first, we're going to read through the idea of the passage and only then do we get on to the questions. The stories concerning the undead have always been with us. From out of the primal darkness of mankind's earliest years comes whispers of eerie creatures, not quite alive, or alive in a way which we can understand, yet not quite dead either. So they're just in the limbo. They're neither dead nor are they really alive. These may have been ancient and primitive deities who dwelt deep in the surrounding forest and in remote places, or simply those deceased who refused to remain in their tombs and who wandered about the countryside, physically tormenting and frightening those who were still alive. So, I mean, they could be the ones who have been, in the ancient primitive deities who actually dwelt deep in the surrounding forest, or probably in those remote areas, or the ones, who just refuse to leave the body and, take to the heaven and are just roaming about in the countrysides. The ones who are physically tormenting and frightening for the ones who are still alive. Mostly they are ill-defined. Strange sounds in the night beyond the comforting glow of the fire, or a shape half glimpsed in the twilight along the edge of the encampment. So, I mean, the way they tend to frighten us is that there'll just be some eerie noise that's going to come, or maybe a reflection. They were vague and indistinct, but they were always there with the power to terrify and disturb. But then they were vague. I mean, one could not really make out who it was or what, but then there was always an inkling towards fear. They had the power to touch the minds of our early ancestors and to fill them with dread. Dread means to be frightened. So they had the power to even shake the bones of, the ancestors. Such fear formed the basis of the earliest tales, although the source and the exact nature of such terror remains very vague. And this is how the earlier tales have been, those really dark horror tales that we have, but we still don't know what the exact source of these have been. Further, it says, and as mankind became more sophisticated, leaving the gloom of their caves and forming themselves into recognizable communities, towns, cities, whole creatures, So the undead traveled with them, inhabiting their folklore just as they had in former times. And just as man moved ahead, advanced, so did the undead too. So they also carried their folklore and kept changing their kept taking newer forms, just as they did in the earlier times. Now they began to take on more definitive shapes. They became walking cavaders, the physical embodiment of former deities and things which had existed alongside man since the creation. So they are the ones who became like these walking cavaders. Right? They actually took into the physical embodiment of the former deities and they started to exist. Some still remained vague and ill defined, but as mankind strove to explain the horror which it felt towards them, each creature emerged more readily into the light. And while they still remain vague, we still don't have any clarity as to how that has happened, or do they even, are they even there really sticking around us or not? But there was always this unexplained horror that they had. In order to confirm their abnormal status, many of the undead were often accorded attributes which defied the natural order of things: the power to transform themselves into other shapes, the ability to sustain themselves by drinking human blood, the ability to influence human minds across the distance. And just so that, one could actually recognize that, okay, there is something like that, they were given a very abnormal status. And they defied the natural order of things. So they would do all things that are pretty unnatural, like drinking the milk, the fact that they would turn into any shape, the fact that they would influence our mind as well. Such powers, described as supernatural, only lent an added dimension to the terror of the humans felt regarding them, and this only added more to the burdening horror that was there. And it was only natural too that the undead should become connected with the practice of magic. And of course, it was natural, it was a given. I mean, with all these things that are happening, clearly magic had to come into the, it just had to come into the scene. From very early times, shamans and witch doctors had claimed at least some power and control over the spirits of the departed ancestors. This has continued down into more civilized times. Now, the shamans and the witch doctors, they've had a very important place back in the past, also in even today, knowing that they are the ones who are able to control onto the semi-departed spirits. Formerly, the invisible spirits and forces that thronged around men's earliest encampment had spoken through the tribal shamans, but now, as entities in their own right, they were subject to magical control and could be physically summoned by a competent sorcerer. So earlier it was always these shamans who would, sort of bring them down and be able to converse as to what is it that they want. But now they, of course, are physically summoned by a competent sorcerer. Sorcerer is a magician. However, the relationship between the magician and the undead creature was often a very tenuous and uncertain one, but then the kind of relationship that they had was very tenuous. Some sorcerers might have even become undead entities once they died, but they might have also been susceptible to the power of the other magicians when they did. Maybe a lot of sorcerers turned into these undead creatures. They were also lost souls who could not find peace ultimately, while some, of course, were also susceptible to the powers of the other magicians. That is, they weren't vulnerable, or they might just be vulnerable. From the Middle Ages and into the ages of establishment, theories of the undead continued to grow and develop, and this has been an ongoing, saga. Their names became more familiar: werewolf, vampire, ghoul. Each one certain to strike fear into the hearts of the ordinary man. And then these list of names that we have as to how we recognize, only to be instilling more fear. So that's exactly what the passage is about. A very interesting passage at that, very unlike CAT, because CAT, gets more into psychology and sociology and economics and stuff like that. But, to have something which is around magic, mystery is, of course, a newer arena for CAT also to be venturing into. But fun passage, let's get on to the questions. Which one of the following best describes what the passage is about? So this is a main idea question. We are going to see which of the following is going to capture the main idea. We'll have the rule of the protagonist, we'll have the third person perspective rule, and we're going to see the one option that's going to cater to the gist of the passage. The passage discusses the evolution of theories of the undead. Now, undead is a protagonist for us, of course. From primitive thinking to the age of enlightenment. Okay, that makes sense because that's exactly, that's taking into account the entire timestamp of when it started and how it has, morphed into even the recent times. Because as people have changed, so have the understanding of the undead, and so has, the way the transformation of the undead has also happened. Makes sense. Let's observe this. The passage describes the failure of human beings to fully comprehend their environment. No, it's not about, and plus fully comprehend as in they've not been able to understand even one bit. It's nada, zero, zilch. That's not what it is. The writer describes the way in which the undead come to be associated with shamans and the practice of the magic. That's not what the passage is about. While there is a mention of how the sorcerers and the shamans have come into play, but and the witchcraft, of course, but the passage is just not about that. I need a question that is going to be about the passage at large, not just an idea of the passage. Can't be my answer. The writer discusses the transition from primitive thinking to the age of enlightenment. Now, we don't have the mention of undead, so it's just not the transition, it's the transition of the theories of the undead. So, if I don't have a protagonist, I can't have a main idea. So, this is not going to be my answer either, which means the correct answer is going to be option A. Okay, next. All of the following, if false, could be seen as being in accordance with the passage except. Now, please understand again what does it want you to do. So, it says all of the following, if false, could be seen in accordance with the passage. So, only if this were to be false will it rhyme with the idea of the passage except. Except means the one thing now that is going to be false but is not going to be with the passage, which means it is going to be find us that one answer, that one option which is now going to be away from the passage. All right, now let's see. Starting with, so I'll explain with the options, maybe we'll understand better. So I hope everybody understands. It's very easy, but requires, the mind to play around a little. So it says all of the following, if false, could be seen as being in accordance with the passage. So only when it is false. So let's take the first option to understand. The undead remained vague and ill-defined even as mankind strove to understand the horror they inspired. Now, the undead, whoever be the undead, of course, they remained vague and ill-defined. That is, of course, that is what the passage went about. Even as mankind strove to understand the horror they inspired. There was a horror that they always instilled into the people. Right now, if this be false, that is, the undead have not remained vague and have not been ill-defined. Even as mankind strove to understand the horror they inspired, so the mankind is not striving to understand whatever it is. Could it be seen as in accordance with the passage? That is what it is. So of course, maybe we might want to reserve this. Let's see the other. The transition from the Middle Ages to the Age of Enlightenment saw new theories of the undead. Now, okay, but this has never been spoken about, so this could also be false. So let's reserve this. First, eliminate. The growing sophistication of mankind meant that humans stopped believing in the undead. Now, if this be false, it's going to align with the passage because the growing sophistication of mankind meant that humans start believing more in the dead. So, this is definitely something that is, if false in accordance with the passage, this can't be an answer. The relationship between shamans and the dead was believed to be strong and a stable one. Now, if this be false, is it going to be in alignment with the passage? Definitely. So, this is not going to be an answer either, which means our answer will have to be between A and B. So now again, all of the following if false could be seen as being in accordance with the passage. So if these are false, that is not being an answer for me, it is going to be in accordance with the passage. So I have to find the one thing now which is except. So the one thing that is against the passage. Simple. Three options are alongside the passage. One of it is not aligned with the passage. What is the one answer? The undead remains vague and ill-defined even as mankind strove to understand the horror. This is true as per the passage, which means this can't be my answer. The transition from the Middle Ages to the Age of Enlightenment saw new theories of the. This is false. Of course, this is what becomes of my answer. So if you see, it was a very simple question. All what they want us to do is, all of the following statements, if false, could be seen as being in accordance with the passage. If they're false, that is, if they're not an option for me, they're going to be in accordance with the passage except. So give me that one information which is false as per the passage. That's it. Okay. In order to confirm their abnormal status, many of the undead were often accorded attributes which defied the natural order of things. Which of the following best explains the claim made in the passage? So it says, in order to confirm their abnormal status, right? Many of the undead, so we actually gave these undead proper attributes we could align themselves to. So what does this claim that we have? go to, or which of the following best expresses? The natural attributes of the undead are rendered abnormal by changing their status? No. They're not rendered abnormal. It's just that one would never do such designation for a non-living thing or for a thing that doesn't exist but only exists in the mind. So that is the abnormal part of it. This can't be the answer. Now let's get to the seventh one. Option B, sorry. According to the undead, an abnormal status is to reject the natural. Okay, that's again, we're not rejecting anything over here. Human beings conceptualize the undead as posing abnormal features. Yes, that is the abnormality of it. I mean, they're not living, they have these strange powers, they drink blood, and yet we want to, have a certain, we want to have a certain title for them so that we recognize who is being talked about. So yes, this can be the undead are deified in nature's order by giving them divine attributes. Now that's not what this line means. There has been connection to deities in the original part of the passage, but not later. This can't be the answer either, which means the correct answer is going to be option C. Which one of the following observation is a valid conclusion to draw from the statement? So we have to see which of the following is going to be a valid conclusion. From out of the primal darkness of mankind's earliest years come whispers of eerie creatures, not quite alive or alive in a way which we can understand, yet not quite dead either, which means in today's times as well, there are these undead that exist. Their existence is mysterious, their existence is a little eerie, but they are there undeniably. So whichever will speak on this will become my answer. Mankind's early years were marked by a belief in the existence of eerie creatures that weren't quite alive nor dead. Makes sense. Definitely an answer for me. We can understand the lives of the eerie creatures in mankind's early years through their whispers in the darkness. No, that's not what the conclusion is. Mankind's primal years were marked by creatures alive with eerie whispers but seen only in the darkness. Well, that's not what it is. Can't be my answer. Long ago, eerie creatures used to whisper in the primal darkness that they were not quite okay. Now that's also pretty vague, not an answer for me, which means the correct answer is just this one, which is going to be option A. I hope this passage is also absolutely clear. And with that, let's get on to the next passage, everyone. Right, guys. And with that, let's just very conveniently glide into the next passage. Starting from 9 to 12, we are back to Cat's favorite genre. So let's begin first things first again with the understanding of the passage before we move on to the questions that we have. Now, critical theory of technology is a political theory of modernity with a normative dimension. So it goes about by saying that critical theory of technology, right, is what they've termed. Now, this is a political theory of modernity with a normative dimension. It belongs to a tradition extending from Marx to Foucault and Habermas, according to which advances in the formal claims of human rights take center stage, while in the background, centralization of even more powerful public institutions and private organization imposes an authoritarian social order. So they go about by saying, I mean, the entire theory goes about by saying that in the middle, or in the formal claims, it looks as if it is the human rights that take center stage. But in the background, it is always going to be centralization, that is coming together of even more powerful institutions and private organizations, which ultimately want to impose a authoritarian social order, so very imperialistic social order. Marx attributed this trajectory to a capitalist rationalization of production. Now, Marx went about by saying that the reason why this happens is because of the rationalization, the capitalistic rationalization of production. Capitalist economy basically means the one that has been run by individuals. Today, it marks many institutions beside the factory and every modern political system, including so-called socialist systems. And today, this is something that we can see right from the factories to even the so-called socialists. So they claim to be socialist, but actually they're also capitalist. This trajectory arose from the problems of command over a disempowered and de-skilled labor force, but everywhere that masses are organized, whether it be Foucault's prison or Habermas's public sphere, the same pattern prevails. And then he goes about by saying that this problem of commands is everywhere. The moment you're going to see that there are a group of people, this is something that will naturally come up. Technological design and development is shaped by this pattern as a material base of the distinctive social order. So it's on the social order that whatever be the technological design and development that is to happen happens. Marcuse would later point to a project as the basis of what he called, rather confusingly, technological rationality. And later Marcuse happened to coin this term, which is technological rationality. Releasing technology from this project is an democratic political task. So now over here, he just goes about by saying releasing the technology from this project. That is, it's technological rationality, but the moment you drop the word technological from this, it becomes a very, it becomes from this project. It's supposed to be, I think, democratic, not democratic. So this becomes a democratic political task. Moving further, now it says, in accordance with this general line of thought, so understanding this pitch, critical theory of technology regards technologies as an environment rather than a collection of tools. So it's just not the tools, it's the entire environment, right? What is in front and what is making up this entire structure. We live today with and even within technologies that determine our way of life. Along with the constant pressures to build centers of power, many other social values and meanings are inscribed in the technological design. So they're very meaningful also. A hermeneutics of technology must make explicit the meanings implicit in the devices we use and the rituals they script. And it should be, a customary practice wherein they tell us their explicit meanings that are given to at least the devices, the ones that we use on daily lives, and the kind of, the usage that it brings. Social histories of technology such as bicycle, artificial lightning, or firearms have made important contributions to this type of analysis. So, say for example, be it the bicycle or be the firearms, they've actually given us the script and they have done some meaningful contribution. Critical theory of technology attempts to build a methodical approach on the lessons of these histories. So it helps us simplify and understand the usage of it, thereby giving us a methodical approach. As an environment, technologies shape their inhabitants. And of course, technologies are what are going to define how the human conduct is to be. In this respect, they are comparable to laws and customs, and which is why they're pretty analogous to the idea of laws and customs. Each of these institutions can be said to present those who live under their sway through privileging certain dimensions of the human nature. Law of property represents the interest of ownership and control. Customs, such as parental authority, represent the interest of childhood in safety and growth. Similarly, the automobile represents its user insofar as they are interested in mobility. Interests such as these constitute the version of human nature sanctioned by society. So it is the interest that actually tells us how vital is going to be the existence of that particular thing. This notion of representation does not imply an eternal human nature. It doesn't mean it's eternal. The concept of nature as non-identity in the Frankfurt School suggests an alternative. On these terms, the nature is what lies at the limit of history, at the point at which society loses the capacity to imprint its meaning on things and control them effectively. This reference here, of course, not to the nature of natural science, but to the lived nature in which we find ourselves and which we are. So then, of course, he's talked about how the concept of nature has also been identified to be a non-identity by the Frankfurt School and its suggestion as an alternative. This nature reveals itself as that which is not totally encompassed by the machinery of society. For the Frankfurt School, human nature in all its transcending force emerges out of a historical context, as that context is depicted in illicit joy, struggle, and pathologies. So unlike technology, the Frankfurt School always thought it's the human nature in its all transcending force. So it keeps changing and how it is vital to every part. We can perhaps admit a less romantic conception in which those dimensions of human nature recognized by society are also granted theoretical legitimacy. So of course, this is going to be less romantic, but clearly it is going to be how we embrace the dimensions of human nature and how we ultimately recognize the society and grant it theoretical legitimacy. So it's about the role of technology, how it tends to shape the society at large, and later the School of Frankfurt, which went about by having an alternative view to it and which said that it's a human nature which is an all transcending force. The passive was easy. It started to be confusing at first, but then the more we went about with it, it was easier for us to understand. So always keep going in the passage. Which one of the following contradicts the argument in the passage? So if I am to contradict the argument, I have to find the one option which is going to tell me that technology does not define, nor does the human, nor does the part wherein it went about by saying the human nature is going to. Right? So none of these. Let's see. Marx's understanding of the capitalist rationalism of rationalization of production and Marcuse's understanding of a project of technological rationality are theoretical inclinations. Well, this is true. It does not contradict the idea. This can't be an answer. The problems of command over a disempowered and de-skilled forced labor uh, labor force gave rise to similar patterns in of the capitalist rationalization of production wherever masses were organized. This is cut copy paste. We have this line mentioned just the way it is. This is true. Can't be my answer either. Next, masses are organized in patterns set by Foucault's prison and Habermas's public sphere. No, masses are not set like that. Masses dictate how things need to be. This is definitely false. My answer. Paradoxically, the capitalist rationalization of production is a mark of the so-called socialistic systems as well. Yes, so this is pretty much how it happens in the so-called socialistic patterns also. This is also true. Can't be my answer. Very easy question. The answer becomes option C. Which of the following statements could be inferred as supporting the arguments of the passage? Again, we have to infer it, which means again we want something that's going to talk about human nature and technology, rationality, shaping the society at large. Now let's see which of the following. Nature decides the point at which society loses its capacity. Okay, nothing about nature, out of scope. Technology formed the environmental context and shaped the contours of human society. Just what we were looking for, definitely an answer. It is not human nature, but human culture that is represented by institutions. It's the human nature, not an answer. The romantic conception of nature referred to by the passage is one that requires theoretical. Now, again, this is not an inference because this has been said. An inference is always from the said about the unsaid. So, if this is said and a reiteration, it is not an inference then. It is true as per the passage, but it's not an inference, which means the correct answer becomes option B. Which one of the following statement best reflects the main argument of the fourth paragraph of the passage? Now, again, you must go back to the passage to know what the fourth paragraph is. So, if this be the first paragraph, this be the second paragraph, we have the third paragraph, and then we have the fourth paragraph. So, they're asking us the main idea of this paragraph only. So, clearly in the fourth paragraph, it tends to be talking about how the environment as an environment technology in environment how the technology tend to shape its inhabitants. There is then the relationship, the analogy that has been made with law and custom, and how all of these need to be sanctioned by the society. So let's see, whichever speaks with for this becomes my answer. Technological environments privilege certain dimensions of human nature as effectively as no. It's not about as effectively. In fact, it's like just as what the role of law and custom is, so is the role of technological rationality. Not an answer. Technology, law, and customs are not alike each other if considered as institutions. Now, well, yes, that is something that can be understood. While they're not alike each other, they're not unlike each other. Sorry. So they're not unlike, which means that the analogy that is yes, all of these can be interrelated and that they can be interused. That's exactly what it is. So not unlike two negatives, minus minus plus. Two negatives always make a positive. So when I say are not unlike each other, which means they are pretty alike. Make sense? Definitely an answer. Automobiles represent the interest of mobility. Now, automobiles is not what that paragraph is about. Technology, law, and customs are comparable but dissimilar. No, the phenomena is also pretty similar. So can't be my answer either, which means the correct answer is going to be option B. All of the following claims can be inferred from the passage except. So give me the one thing that is false. Right? That is what we want to know. Analysis of technology must engage with their social histories to be able to reveal their implicit and explicit. True, absolutely true as per the passage, so can't be my answer. The critical theory of technology argues that as issues of human rights become more prominent, we lose sight of the ways in which social order becomes more authoritarian. True, again can't be my answer. The significance of parental authority on children's safety does not therefore imply that parental authority is permanent aspect. Of course, this is true. Again, can't be my answer. I think by elimination we have the answer already. It will have to be D. Technology seek to privilege certain dimensions of human nature at a high cost to lived nature. No, there's no high cost to it. So clearly, the one information that is false as per the passage becomes option D. And I hope this was absolutely clear. And with that, let's bounce on to the last passage for this mock analysis. Of course, post which we have other variants of questions to ourselves. All right, quite a relief it's going to be. We are now on to the last passage of the CAT paper. Let's begin. Now, the Chinese have two different concepts of a copy. Fang Zipin are imitations where the difference from the original is obvious. So, there are always two different concepts of a copy. And now, Fang Zipin is what it is. Now, imitation means a copy where the difference from the original. Now, it's pretty obvious how it is different. Now, these are small models or copies that can be purchased at the museum shop, for example. The second concept of a copy is called Fuzipin. So, one is Fang Zipin, the other is Fuzipin. They are exact reproductions of the original, which for the Chinese are not of equal value to the original. So they are exact reiteration, but they're not of equal value. It has absolutely no negative connotation. The discrepancy with regard to the understanding of what a copy is has often led to the misunderstanding and argument between China and Western museums. The Chinese often send copies abroad instead of originals in the firm belief that they are not essentially different from the originals. The rejection that then comes from the Western museums is perceived by the Chinese as an insult. So the Chinese always feel that this other copy that we've sent, which has a slightly different meaning, I mean, the intent is the same ultimately. But then it is often rejected, which the Chinese don't like at all. The Far Eastern notion of identity is also very confusing to the Western observer. The I Grand Shrine in Japan is 1300 years old for the millions of Japanese people who go there on pilgrimage every year. But in reality, this temple complex is completely rebuilt from scratch every 20 years. So they feel that, it's been 1300 years since it's been done. But in actuality, this is the kind of thing which is rebuilt every 20 years. The Cathedral of Freiburg Minster in southwest Germany is covered in scaffolding almost all year around. Scaffolding is, those bars that you have whenever a building is being made, so the kind of support that we give. So currently Taj Mahal has a lot of scaffolding around it. So this, again, they've used an example to talk about how, they renovate. The sandstones from which it is built is very soft, porous material that does not withstand natural erosion by rain or wind. After a while, it crumbles. As a result, the cathedral is continually being examined for damage and eroded stones are being replaced, which is why they keep doing the repair work. And in the cathedral's dedicated workshop, copies of the damaged sandstone figures are constantly being produced. Of course, attempts are being made to preserve the stones from the Middle Ages for as long as possible, but at some point too are removed and replaced with new stones. So they're trying, but there will always have to be replacement. Fundamentally, this is the same operation as with the Japanese shrines, except in this case, the production of the replicas take place very slowly and over a long period of time. In the field of art as well, the idea of an unassailable original developed historically in the Western world. Back in the 17th century in the West, excavated artwork from antiquity were treated quite differently from today. They were not restored in a way that was faithful to the original. Instead, there were massive interventions in these works changing their appearances, but this was not how it was earlier. So there were massive changes that would happen. It is probably this intellectual position that explains why Asians have far few scruples about cloning than Europeans, and maybe this explains the reason why. The South Korean cloning researcher Wang Woo-suk, who attracted worldwide attention for his cloning experiment in 2004, is a Buddhist. He found a great deal of support and followers among Buddhists, while Christians called for a ban on human cloning. Wang legitimized his cloning experiment with his religious affiliation. I'm a Buddhist and I have no philosophical problem with cloning. And as you know, the basis of Buddhism is that life is recycled through reincarnation. In some way, I think therapeutic cloning restarts the circle of life. So he simply just goes to uh, goes to justify as to why he is doing what he is doing because his religion allows it so. So that is what the passage is about. It's about how they're trying to be redoing the art and that it's not a wrong thing to do. And that's the justification that we have. Now, based on the passage, which of the following copies would a Chinese museum be unlikely to consider as having less value than the original? Now, we know for a fact that if we need to have an option for it to have a next, I mean, for it to not have the original value, we need to apply the definition of Fuzipin, which is a Chinese concept that has been mentioned in the passage. Now, according to which a Fuzipin is regarded as being of equal value to the original and lacking negative implications. Now let's see. Pablo Picasso's painting and Vincent van Gogh's original painting identical in every respect? Yes, that is definitely something that they are that they are not going to consider, or they're going to have, they're going to go about by thinking that it is not something that has the right value. Now it is consistent because it represents exact replica, making it clearly likely to be perceived as equivalent to the original. And the one thing that they sought to make us understand was the fact that they would not agree with something which is an exact copy of it. Right? So the question is asking which of the following copies would a Chinese museum be unlikely to consider as having less? So it's going to be unlikely, and that is definitely likely to be an answer. Let's keep this. Pablo Picasso's painting of Vincent van Gogh's original painting bearing Picasso's signature. Now there's been a tweak. Now the moment we have any sort of tweak, it does not qualify as the exact copy. Now that is where the ideation begins. So this is not an answer. Pablo Picasso's miniaturized but otherwise faithful and accurate painting of the Vincent van Gogh's original painting. Now the moment it is going to be something which is miniaturized, again there is some sort of disruption, right? Now it has, for us to understand that the Chinese museum is unlikely to consider as having less value than the original. For that, there has to be exact reproduction of the original. Anything otherwise is still going to, match the idea. So not an answer. Pablo Picasso's photograph of Vincent van Gogh's original painting printed to be exactly the same scale. No, that's again not what it is. So of course, this has to be identical in every aspect. This is one aspect, this is every aspect. So the correct answer becomes A. Let's go to the next. Which one of the following statements does not correctly express the similarity between the I Grand Shrine and the Cathedral of Freiburg Minster? Now over here, if you see in the passage, of course, we have to find the one that is not correctly expressing. Now, both are continually undergoing restoration. Now we know for a fact that both are not continually going. This is wrong because the Eye of Shrine, unlike the Freiburg's Minster, undergoes a complete reconstruction every 20 years. So this is definitely an answer for me. Both will one day become completely rebuilt. Well, ultimately, yes, that is what is going to happen. Both are built as places of worship, definitely. Both can be regarded as old structures, yes. So the one thing that is wrong is option A. It's not continually. One goes every 20 years. The other, of course, has the scaffolding going all throughout. Which one of the following scenarios is unlike to follow from the argument in the passage? So if it has to be unlike, it has to not follow the sequence of the passage. Now let's see. A 20th century Japanese Buddhist monk would value a reconstructed shrine as an original. Yes, because the Buddhist is all about, the circle, reincarnation of the circle of life. This is true. If it is true, it is not my answer. A 21st century Christian scientist is likely to oppose cloning because of his philosophical orientation. Now, again, this is true because that is what we inferred from the last paragraph. Christianity was onto a total ban of cloning. This is true, not my answer. A 17th century British painter would have no problem adding personal touches when restoring an ancient understanding. Now, yes, that is also true because in the passage, we know that intervention in the artwork was something which was embraced. So this is true, can't be my answer, which means the answer will have to be D. A 17th century French artist who adhered to the Christian worldwide would need to be completely true to the original intent of the painting while restoring it. Now, this is not going to be the answer because in the passage, in fact, even in the past, the 17th century in the West, when they excavated artworks from antiquity, they underwent significant changes and intervention, altering the appearance. So over here, if it is completely true, it is going to misalign with the idea of the passage, so it is unlikely to follow. And the last one, the value of the modern West assigns to an unassailable original has resulted in all of the following except. So what is the one thing that has not been a consequence of it? So which of the following is false? Which of the following? It discourages them from carrying out human. No, it in fact encourages them. So this is very much an answer for me straight away. Let's just authenticate the other ones. It discourages them from simultaneous display of multiple copies of a painting. Now, of course, when I say an unassailable original, yes, that is the kind of idea that can be deduced from the passage, wherein the Western philosophy tends to emphasize the significance of the original and regard it as more valuable, more authentic. It discourages them from making interventions in ancient art. Yes, that is also something that can be deduced. It follows regular employment of certain craftsmen. Okay, now that's also something that we can definitely extract, though a little far-fetched, but yes, if you go back to the example of the cathedral, where the craftsmen are continuously employed to preserve and restore, that gives out the consequence of the unassailable original, which means the correct answer becomes option A. So I hope the passage again has been very, very clear. And with that, let's move on to the next question that we have. Starting from 17, it says the passages given below by 4 alternate summaries. We have to find the one which is going to fit the best. Let's go. Choose the option that best captures. Now, here is where. Petitioning is an expeditious democratic tradition used frequently in prior centuries by which citizens can bring issues directly to government. As expressions of collective voice, they support procedural democracy by shaping agendas. They can also recruit citizens to causes, give voice to the voteless, and apply the discipline of rhetorical argument that clarifies a point of view. By contrast, elections are limited in several respects. They involve only a few candidates and thus fall short of a representative democracy. Further, voters' choice are not specific to particular policies or law or elections, are episodic, whereas the voice of the people needs to be heard and integrated constantly into democratic government. So we know that whatever should be our answer will have to take into account the fact that they're trying to be talking about what petitioning does, how there are these expressions of a collective voice, and then of course the contrast, because that is also something that has been talked about, how sometimes elections can be very limited, but ultimately it has to be something which is integrated into the democratic government. So now let's see which of the following is going to take into account all of the ideas that we just penned down. By giving citizens greater control over shaping political and democratic agendas, political petitions are invaluable as they represent an ideal form of representative government. No, now that's not what it is. The passage never said that it's an ideal form. This is too much of a stretch. This can't be my answer at all. Let's get on to the next. Petitioning is definitely more representative of a collective. Now, when I say it's definitely more representative, now this looks like an opinion. It doesn't really look like a summary. So I think let's just remove it because the tone in option B doesn't sit well with us. Citizens have become less inclined to petitioning. Now, this again is not what the passage suggests. Nowhere, in fact, the passage does not address the prevalence of petitioning at all in contemporary times. So this is not going to be an answer, which means it'll have to be D. Petitioning has been important to democratic functioning as it supplements the electoral process by enabling ongoing engagements with the government. Just has all the things that we spoke about, captures the essence of the passage and hence the correct answer. Okay, the 4 sentences are given below. We need to yield it into a coherent paragraph, decide the proper sequencing for the options. Let's go. First things first, we will be reading all of the statements, find an opener for us, find the mandatory pairs, and bam, we have the answer. Some company leaders are basing their decision on locating offices to foster innovation and growth as their best performing inventors suffered the greatest productivity losses when their commutes grew longer. Okay. Shorter commutes support innovation by giving employees more time in the office and greater opportunities for in-person collaboration while removing the physical strain of the long commute. Okay, all right. This is not always the case. Remote work does not automatically lead to greater creativity and productivity, as office water cooler conversations are also very important. Some see the link between long commutes and productivity as support from work from his scenarios, as many workers have grown accustomed to their commute-free arrangements during the pandemic. So all of these lines tend to be speaking about how shorter commutes can actually be more productive. The fact that though the water cooler conversations are also important, but it's the kind of thing which will, of course, aid the pandemic, I mean, aid productivity, and the pandemic has given us a work from home sort of an angle also. So, of the lot, I know that my opener will have to be two. Now that I've spoken, shorter commute support innovation by giving employees more time in the office and greater time for in-person collaboration, removing all of the physical strain. So the next has to be how and because of which there have been companies who have actually put their decision on relocating, the offices to such places wherein they can foster innovation and growth of the best performing inventors, which means the next will have to be one, because what was happening is there were losses of productivity when the commute grew longer. Now, going on to the moment you talk about the longer idea, the next will have to be an assisting idea of what is going to be long. Nexus में information रहती है तो अगला long commute में आ जाएगा, which means one के बाद हमारा four आ गया यहाँ पे clearly. Productivity and support from work from home scenarios, as many have grown accustomed to that. Now that we have introduced the idea of the pandemic, we always say this is not always the case. Remote work is work from home. So the moment you introduce the idea of work from home, you can then further talk about work from home, which makes 4 and 3 a mandatory pair, 1 and 4 a mandatory pair, the opening being 2. The correct sequence that we have is 2, 1, 4, and 3. This was a fun one. I hope you understand. Okay. Now in the 19th one, there is a statement. There are numbers. We have to see where exactly are we going to fit the statement so that it's going to make complete sense. Easing the anxiety and pressure of having a big day is part of the appeal for many couples who marry in secret. So this easing the anxiety and the pressure of having a big day, जो सबसे important, and the part that we have to appeal is part of the appeal for many couples who marry in secret. So it's like they want to ease their anxiety. They don't want to have those cold feet. They don't want to have the jitters, and that's why they want to just marry in secret. The wedding season is upon us, and after 2 years of COVID chaos, that saw nuptials scaled back. You may think the temptation would be to go all out. Dash. But instead, the expanding. Now, clearly, one is not an answer for me. Why? Because I know for a fact that over here we're still trying to be talking about what COVID did. It doesn't talk about the anxiety. We have to talk about the couple and why they refrain from going loud on their marriage day. That's where this idea will come in. So one is not an answer. Option A stands eliminated. But instead of expanding the guest list, many couples are opting to have entirely secret ceremonies. Okay, here is where the secret ceremony idea comes in. With COVID case numbers remaining high and the cost of living crisis meaning that many couples are feeling the pinch, it's no wonder that some are less eager to send out invites. Okay, now is where we want to understand they don't want to send. Plus, it can hurt. So, which means it is something that has already been mentioned. I think the statement can be a perfect fit over here, because the moment you say easing the anxiety and the pressure of having the bid is part of the appeal, plus part, and then that being the other part, the part that has been mentioned here. So B definitely makes for it. Our answer is going to be option 2, because here is where the ideas. You can always check the other ones just to be sure that it is not going to be fitting in there. I hope you guys are completely convinced as to why we have that as an answer, and let's get to the next. Again, a parrot jumble. On to question number 20. The creative element in product design has become of paramount importance, as it is one of the few ways a firm or industry can sustain a competitive advantage over its rivals. Okay, so it's the creative element. In fact, creative element is the value of world industry. In the value of world industry would be larger still if we added the contribution of creative elements in other industries such as design or the tech accessories. The creative industry is receiving a lot of attention today as its growth rate is faster than that of the whole world economy as a whole. I think the moment you read this, you know an opener. It is for this reason that today's trade issues are increasingly involving intellectuals. So this reason means there will have to be a reason. Now that I know that I've started, I will simply make mandatory pairs with subsisting ideas. Now, if I start with 3, that says the creative industry is receiving a lot of attention today as its growth rate is faster than that of the whole world economy as a whole. The next idea, of course, will have to be what does it do, or how does it add more value? So the second statement comes in next. In fact, the creative element is the value of the world. Again, trying to be talking about as the whole. world industry if we added the contribution of the creative element in other industries. Now that we've talked about other industries, let's sort of merge in the idea of what the other industries have to offer. So the next is going to be the creative element in project design has become of paramount importance as it is one of the few ways firms or industries can sustain. So here is where we tend to be talking about the other industries, how they have a competitive advantage. And it is for this reason, that is the fact that there is a competitive advantage, that the trade issues are increasingly involving intellectual property. So because this competitive advantage. So the series is going to be 3, 2, 1 and 4. Very easy there. I hope everyone's understood why we have that as an answer. Let's get on to question number 21, a summary type again. It is not that modern historians of medieval Africa have been ignorant about contacts between Ethiopia and Europe. They just had the power dynamics reversed. So it's not that they didn't know, they reversed it. The traditional narrative stressed Ethiopia as weak and in trouble in the face of aggression from external forces. So Ethiopia sought military assistance from their fellow Christians to the north. But the real story, buried in plain sight in medieval diplomatic text, simply had not yet been put together by modern scholars. Recent research pushes scholars of medieval Europe to imagine a much more richly connected medieval world. At the beginning of the so-called Age of Exploration, there is evidence that the kings of Ethiopia were sponsoring their own missions of diplomacy, faith, and commerce. So now, if I want an option, of course, I will want the kind of option that is going to set the narrative that Ethiopia was weak and it sought military help from the Europeans. But of course, then there was recent research that showed that Ethiopia was actually a well-connected and an outward-looking culture that engaged in missions of diplomacy, faith, and commerce with the Europe. So I want the two contesting ideas for myself. Historians were under the illusion that Ethiopia needed political protection from their neighbors, but in fact, the country had close commercial and religious connections with them. Now, A can't be an answer because the historians were not under the illusion, they were the ones who created this narrative. Medieval texts have been cherry-picked to promote the view that Ethiopia as weak and in need of Europe's military help with aggressive neighbors, but recent study revealed it was well connected. Yes, definitely what we are looking for. Let's reserve. Medieval historical sources selectively promoted the narrative that powerful European forces were called on to protest weak African civilization. Now, C has, does not have the mention of the fact that Ethiopia was an outward-looking culture. Medieval texts have documented how strong connections between the Christian Europe communities of the Ethiopia and Europe were invaluable. Okay, now this is too extreme. This is not what was spoken about. I think we have an option which caters to just about everything that we were looking for. Okay, jumping on to a parajumble one more time. Fish skin collagen has excellent thermostability and tensile strength, making it ideal for use as bandage that adheres to the skin and adjusts to body movement. Okay, so it talks about the fish skin collagen. Collagen, one of the main structural proteins and connective tissues of the body, is well known for promoting skin regeneration. I think we've got an opener for us. Fish skin swims in here as disease. So swims in here as disease, and bacteria that affect fish are different from most of the human pathogens. The risk of introducing disease agents into another species through the use of pig and cow collagen proteins for wound healing has inhibited its broader application in the medical field. Okay, so we begin by talking about how collagen tends to promote skin regeneration. Clearly, the next is going to be about once you promote, it's like a cause and effect. So if you're promoting something, what are the likely risks for it? The risk of introducing disease agents into another species through the use of pig cow collagen protein for wound healing. So why wound healing? Because from the regeneration is where the wound healing idea comes in. For the broader application of, so the next comes in 4. Now that I've talked about the disease, I think the next idea will have to continue on the disease. So fish skin swim in here as disease, and bacteria that affect fish are different from most human, and ultimately from the idea of fish, we get the fish skin collagen being the excellent thermostability. So the sequence over here becomes 2, 4, 3, and 1. All that we did was we took information from everywhere, clubbed it into one, and found our answer straight away. 23rd is again a summary type. Let's go. All that we think we know about how life hangs together is really some kind of illusion that we have perpetrated on ourselves because our limited vision. What appears to be inanimate objects, such as stones, turn out not only to be live in the same way that we are, but also in many infinitesimal ways to be affected by stimuli just as humans are. The distinction between animate and inanimate simply cannot be made when you enter the world of quantum mechanics and try to determine how those apparent subatomic particles of which you and everything else in our universe is composed are all tied together. The point is that physics and metaphysics show there is a pattern to the universe that goes beyond our capacity to grasp it with our brains. So the kind of option that we want over here will have to, of course, take into account the limitations of our understanding of how things work. How this has been illustrated through the examples of the animate and the inanimate. The way we distinguish between them may actually be flawed due to our limited perspective. And at a quantum level, there is no distinction between the animate and the inanimate. Now, let's see which one talks about it. Arbitrary distinctions between inanimate and animate objects appear at a scale at which quantum mechanics works. Well, yes, this definitely makes sense. Let's reserve this. The inanimate world is both. Okay, now this does not talk about how, I mean, the entire passage spoke about how at the quantum level there was no distinction, but in a way we are flawed to be able to see that there could actually be a distinction. So now where the inanimate is both, so this goes to, further propose the distinction. It says that the words sentient and cognizant for inanimate are a valid distinction, but then that's not going to be. Anyways, we have not talked about these words. Can't be my answer. The effect of stimuli is similar in inanimate objects when compared to animate objects or living beings. Now, C is altogether wrong. The passage mentions that the inanimate objects are affected by stimuli just like humans are affected. It does not mention that the effect is similar. This is wrong. Quantum physics indicates that an astigmatic view of reality results in erroneous assumptions about the universe. I think the passage has nothing about an astigmatic view. So this can't be an answer. Don't add anything. It's a summary. We can't go to add. And the last one for the passage. Now again a line, and we have to find which of the following is going to be the most suitable fit for the line. Having made citizens more or less knowledgeable than their predecessors, the internet has proved to be both a blessing and a curse. So it has to be both. Never before has the population, nearly all of whom has enjoyed at least a secondary school education, been exposed to so much information, whether in newspapers, magazines, or through Google, YouTube, or Facebook. So we have the first blank over there. Clearly, that's not where the statement is going to fit, because having made citizens more or less, it's not that. Yet it is not clear that people today are more knowledgeable. Okay, here is where the knowledge idea seeps in. So this is not an answer for this. Than their barely literate predecessors. Now it says that it is not very clear. Contemporary advances in technology offered more serious and inquisitive students access to the realm of knowledge previously unimaginable and unbelievable. Dash. But, so if I say, having made citizens more or less knowledgeable than their predecessors, the internet has proved to be both a blessing and a curse. We understand it's more of a conclusive sort of an idea, because here we are still trying to be talking about, the pros or the cons. That's how we are going. Because here if you see, but such readily available knowledge leads to many more students away from serious studies, this reading of actual text, and towards the inability of writing effectively and grammatically. It's a con, right? It has a lot of people choose sources that reinforce their opinion rather than encouraging them to question inherited beliefs. Now, again, that, goes on to be establishing an aspect. So I know for a fact that neither will 2 nor will 3 have it, because my statement talks about both the internet being a good thing and a bad thing as well. So I know that this is a conclusive line, which means the answer will have to be D, which is a wrap. That is, in the end, internet is both a boon and a bane, a curse and a blessing. So it's double-edged that ways. And with that, we come to an end to the mock analysis. Now this has by far been one of the toughest slot. So if you ever were to witness a slot like this, you would really want some blessings of God and for it to really be a good day for you to be able to finish. Now the passages were not very difficult, but then from the optics of it, they did seem difficult. The questions were set in such a way wherein there were a lot of deductions that you had to do to understand what the question was from you. These little things take time. Ultimately है तो 40 ही मिनट ना हमारे पास करने के लिए. So please make sure that you are well equipped with these genres. You're able to understand how the options go so that the next time something like this comes, you are not taken aback and you know what needs to be done. All right, guys. Thank you so much for being earful and giving your valuable time to this mock analysis. I'm going to see you soon with slot 2 very soon. Until then, make sure that you always see the analysis only after having solved the entire paper within the 40 minutes of the time that you have. Because if you've not solved it previously and you're simply seeing the analysis, it's going to do no good. Thank you so much, everybody.